Order. Okay, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning, everybody. We'll try that again. Roll call, a roll call, let the record show that all commission members are present. Changes to the agenda, staff?
No changes.
No changes to the agenda. Does any member of the, under public comment, any member of the public wish to speak on items not on the agenda? Not seeing any. Moves us to a really nice thing. We want to welcome new commissioner, Dr. Keller. Arturo, thank you for volunteering. We'll put you through your paces as you come here, but we're really looking forward to your involvement and activities here. So we're really, really pleased to have you on the commission.
Thank you very much.
Okay, first order of business is the appointment of officers for the coming fiscal year. I would move to appoint Commissioner Jordan as chair and Commissioner Burney as vice chair. Is there a second?
Second.
There is a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Well, I got to think about this one. No. Okay, that motion passes unanimously. Congratulations, Mr. Jordan. It's your meeting.
Descent into anarchy, huh? And he was worried about Megan, not me, by the way. I just want you to know. All right, so first item up, consent item. If you guys have reviewed the minutes and have no comments, we can
I do have a comment.
fire away.
Comment on item E, the appointment of the Sea Level Rise Adaptation Ad Hoc Subcommittee member. Commissioner Burney volunteered to serve. I'd like a notation. It's a notation that subsequent to the meeting, Commissioner Burney had a conflict and Commissioner Davis volunteered to serve. That way it gets in the record of what happened.
So noted. So noted. Anybody else? So if maybe you'd make the motion with that change.
Make a motion to approve the consent calendar.
I'll second.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That would pass unanimously. And then public comment. Any member of the public that would like to comment on items that aren't on the agenda? We did? I'm sorry. I'm going backwards. So, okay. Oh, we did. Okay. Sorry. And then let's move on to, that's why I'm in the minutes. I'm already out of sorts. Sorry. Okay. So let's move on to the administrative items. The first one would be the appointment of wastewater public outreach ad hoc subcommittee. Ms. Arroyo.
Hi, good morning. Lisa Arroyo, Wastewater System Manager. And we are requesting support from the Commission for an ad hoc subcommittee to support us with our public outreach efforts. It is largely related to wastewater. We would be looking for support from our public outreach consultant to provide us with timely communication to our ratepayers regarding the collection system. That would involve sending out notices or being able to post notices to our website regarding fat soils and grease, wipes, what not to flush, all of the initiatives that we're undertaking to help reduce both private and public spills. It would also entail giving the public a little more information about the sewer lateral inspection program. Regarding El Estero, we are investing significant capital money into El Estero on a routine basis, and it will continue for the foreseeable future. So we're wanting to communicate with the public regarding the investments we're making. An exciting time will be coming up when we are going to be renaming and rebranding El Estero as a resource recovery center. So that will be part of the public outreach initiative. And finally, the One Water Roadmap. We are embarking on One Water for the city of Santa Barbara, and we definitely need some support with that initiative. So we did send out a request for proposals probably about a month and a half ago. We got 5 proposals back yesterday. We will be interviewing the top candidates in the beginning of August, and we will be going to City Council with a recommendation at the beginning of September. So we felt this was a timely meeting to start getting an ad hoc committee together, and we're requesting 2 members.
Can you remind all of us what else we have out there? So we did the rate study one last week. That's Jordan and Kilbourne, and the sea level rise one, right?
Correct.
That's just one of us? Okay, and that's all that's out there right now, right? For commitments for ad hoc subcommittees?
I believe so.
Okay. All right, anybody up?
Question. So I see interview scheduled August 6th and 7th. So I'm interested in this. I will be out of the country until August 9th. So I don't know if other people are interested or how firm that date is. But if it's not a firm date and there's nobody else interested, then I would be. But I do have a conflict on that one as well.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Burney, I'm not sure that if you had a strong desire to participate, that being here for the selection would be something that would be critical. I think it's once we get a consultant on board, it's that ongoing active participation with us is where we really need the support.
I'd volunteer then.
Okay. Mr. Keller,
Yeah, I'd like to volunteer as well.
anybody else want to fight over it?
I would like to also mention, I was going to say this at the end of the meeting, but our next Water Commission meeting is when we discuss our work objectives for the next year. And so then we'll be going through everything, and there may be some ideas that come out of that meeting that would lead to more ad hoc committees. But at this time, we don't have any for today, but that might be something we discuss next month.
Okay. So does that need a motion, or is that just my discretion to take their,
I'd go ahead and put on the record, I'd move
Okay.
Bernie and Keller.
thank you. Somebody second that?
I'll second it.
Thank you. And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Perfect. Welcome aboard to that. Okay, thanks. Are you interested in an alternate if somebody's not there?
Absolutely.
Okay. So is anybody interested in being an alternate? You are. I would. Okay. So I would agree to be an alternate. And if you want somebody there on those August dates, just to sit in a chair and listen, because Megan can't be there, I'd be happy to just sit in and then report out, or help report out.
Just the only issue there is that there's three of you, and I'm not the attorney. That could be a Brown Act
Let
issue.
me-
That's why you have
Let me
ad
phrase
hoc.
my use of the word alternate, and that would be that if one of the two
It's
can't be
still-
there, it's still only two.
It still could be an issue, because
Okay.
again, we're only 5 people,
I'll
so.
put
I-
that in your guys' court to figure out if it's okay. Okay. Next up, the contract for preliminary design services for Al Estero wastewater treatment plant electrical upgrade. Take it away, Lisa, again.
Okay, thank you. Lisa Arroyo, Wastewater System Manager. I'm pleased to present the electrical distribution upgrades project. In today's presentation, I'll be going over a project overview, what we've done for a selection process, the budget and timeline, as well as a recommendation. Pictured here is our main switchgear. It's our 4160 switchgear that comes into the plant. And although you can't really see the age of this equipment is, it was installed in about the 1970s, so it is well past its useful life. And I wanted to show this particular picture because if you look at the left side, that's where our Southern California Edison feed comes in. If you look at the right side, that's where our generator feed comes in, so we can power the plant even if Edison is down for some reason. And in the middle is all of the feeds that go to our electrical substations. This project, we're going to be replacing this piece of equipment, and it's going to be a very major project. And if you can just see there how complex it's going to be to keep our plant running, keep our staff safe, while replacing major electrical equipment, you might start to understand the intensity of this project. It's when we talked about the secondary improvements project, we always talked about it was open heart surgery to the plant. This is brain surgery. It is going to be very challenging. For the project overview, I put this graphic up just to demonstrate the enormous amount of coordination that it's going to take to deliver these elements of the project. We are going to be total upgrade to the electrical distribution system, a new waste gas flare. The cogen system will be analyzing it. We have the administrative consolidation as well as stormwater management. All in all, we're going to be doing 16 workshops. We're going to have 7 technical memorandums that will be produced as part of this preliminary design. At the end of the day, when we have our preliminary design, there'll be 90 design sheets just for preliminary design, and then 50 design sheets for just the flare portion. We will be taking the flare portion to final design. So this is a very major project. For the electrical distribution system, we're basically replacing the whole system. It is from the main 4160 switchgear that I showed you in that picture at the beginning. It's pictured up there on the right side. That big square is our main switchgear and our substation A, all the way down to the feeders, which are all of the cabling and the conduits, down to our 5 substations. On that picture, you'll see our 5 substations, and then our cabling down to our individual motor control centers. We will be also looking at our motor control centers, our MCCs, and replacing those as needed. Most of the time we replace those when we do major upgrades to the process area, but there are some throughout the plant that aren't going to be touched for several years, and we're concerned that we might need to accelerate their replacement. As part of the electrical distribution system project, we will be generating 3 technical memorandums regarding the load analysis, the power distribution system analysis. So we're going to be taking a look at, do we keep the 5 substations? Do we make smaller substations? How is it best to power our facility, keeping in mind what the future holds? And then we'll also be doing a sub-metering analysis, taking a look at all of the various process areas and sub-metering as appropriate to give us better data. Construction sequencing is going to be critical to keep the staff safe and to keep the plant running. The waste gas flare, we talked a lot about this last meeting regarding fat soils and grease. It's one of our main pinch points for us, or immediate pinch points for us, because it's under capacity, it's undersized, it is aging. So as part of this design, we will be doing a technical memorandum on the gas production analysis and evaluation. How big does the flare need to be? And we will be designing, taking it all the way through final design. Even though this contract's for preliminary, we are taking this element through final design because we know we are undersized in our capacity for our flare, and that will help us in the long run get around some of the issues that I talked about last time with the fat soils and grease receiving and the biosolids gas. And as part of this, they will be providing us permitting support. We will have to do some major APCD permits for the flare. We will also be doing a cogen analysis. Part of that analysis will be, what would it take for us to power not only El Estero, but desal in its entirety, so that we have a full picture of, is it even within the realm of possibilities? Secondly, what is within the realm of possibilities and what is feasible given what we know today? It's not just the equipment sizing of the cogen, it's the digesters, it's all the gas piping, it's the electrical distribution system, and it's also the available feedstock. Do we have, or do we think we can even get feedstock to support if we built the infrastructure? So it will be a pretty big analysis that we will bring back to the commission when we are complete. I thought this picture was fun. The consultant who put this together kind of envisioned a second story on top of our administrative building. As I've spoken about before, we do need to consolidate our administrative staff. We have our collection system group. They are in a old chlorine building. We have temporary trailers. So part of this will be consolidating everybody to the appropriate offices, and we're not 100% sure what that looks like. We're going to have a needs analysis done, as well as all of the storage. We have several storage sites around El Estero taking up valuable space that we will need to consolidate and figure out how to better store some of our equipment, some of our consumables. They will be taking this to a 30% design. KBZ Architects is the firm that will be doing and working under our prime engineer to develop this, and then we envision that they will take off in a separate route and continue on and accelerate this in advance of the actual electrical project, because we need to make space for the electrical project to happen. And finally, stormwater management. We have done a stormwater master plan, so to speak, that was done several years ago. We've been implementing as projects go on, but at this point, we will be touching every parcel on El Estero's property, and now is the time to really take a look at and implement the stormwater element. So that will be part of this project. We will be also having our consultant look at our construction general permit for when we go into construction, helping us with that. That's always an important element during construction, as well as our industrial general permit. We have a lot of requirements. We're going to be looking to hopefully implement good stormwater, bioswales, and things like that that will help us to reduce the amount of sampling that we are currently doing. And then it'll help integrate the One Water approach. It's all kind of tied together. As far as the selection process, we mailed out RFPs on May 10th to 8 firms. We got 3 responses. The proposals were due on the 28th of June. We interviewed 2. It was Brown and Caldwell and Carollo, and ultimately we selected Brown and Caldwell to move forward with this work. The interviews took place on July 11th. And so we are working hard to get a proposal and a scope of work finalized, contract in place, and we plan on taking this to the City Council on August 7th. At this point, we have a estimated or budgetary cost. The preliminary design, we're expecting to take up to about $1.6 million. As part of the preliminary design, that includes geotech investigation, a lot of analysis of the various elements that I spoke about, as well as some of the architectural features, and the flare will go to final design. So that's all part of the 1.6. And that also is inclusive of staff time that would be necessary to project manage and permitting, things like that. Flare construction, we're estimating that will take about $1.5 million. The administrative consolidation, we're estimating at about $2 million, with the electrical design and final design and construction taking about $15 million. That's the best we know at this point. As we get through the preliminary design phase, we will be able to dial those numbers in a little bit closer because we'll have better information. At this point, we are looking for an SRF loan, and we'll be applying for an SRF loan to fund this project at the appropriate time. I think we want to get a little bit further along in the design process before we actually apply for the loan. You may recall that we did a biosolids loan and we applied for it. We haven't actually gotten that loan. It was for about $20 million. We will not be we'll be talking to the state about how to withdraw that loan and go forward with this electrical project. So we don't intend on doing both of those at this time. As far as a project timeline, this again shows how complex this project is going to be with all of the various technical memorandums, the workshops. All in all, we expect to be finished with final preliminary design in about a year from now, a little over in September, October of next year. This is how the components fit together. While we're doing final preliminary design, we will start moving forward at the appropriate time with final design on the waste gas flare, with the hopes of having a new flare installed in June of 2020. Probably one of the more complex issues with the flare is going to be the permitting. We will then advance the administrative final design, hoping to wrap that up in fall of 2020, with construction taking about a year in 2021. And then while we're doing that work, we will be doing the electrical final design and that will be the last portion to go into construction. So we're estimating about 5 years from now, we should be through construction if we are able to hold this timeline. So at this point, we are asking for the Water Commission to support staff's recommendation to authorize a professional services agreement with Brown and Caldwell to kick off our preliminary design. And thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions or comments from the
Yeah,
commission?
a comment, Mr. Chair,
ahead.
if I could. It's a little disconcerting for us to get a report which hasn't identified who the consultant was, how much the amount was going to be. And I know that it's going to council, and we have a timing issue relative to the commission. So obviously, I think that the staff report, the draft that you have in here, should basically have some discussion of the selection process and why Brown and Caldwell was selected. Obviously, you're going to identify Brown and Caldwell as the recommended firm, and then the breakout on the actual preliminary design amounts that this contract is for, which you have, placeholders in here. But for the commission, basically, we're actually looking at a, $1.6 million contract, asking us to recommend it. We don't know how or why they were selected, nor the amount, or even who it was. So just, it's a frustration when we get reports which don't have the information in it. We're somewhere in the chain there, and so unfortunately, timing doesn't line up. Anyway, so my comment is, the staff report just needs to be fleshed out.
Thank you.
Others? Go ahead.
So once completed, what's the expected useful life of the electrical system?
Probably the same life that we've gotten out of ours would be about 30 to 40 years. We're really pushing the envelope. We're past 40 years at this point. I wouldn't expect it to suddenly fail at 40 years, but things become very expensive to maintain. So that's what I would be looking for.
And the SRF loan that we're going for would be a 20-year loan. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe they're 20 years.
Okay. Thank you.
Dr. Keller?
So, question on the project cost. So, the cost of $20 million does not include the cogeneration, any changes. It's just a study, or the stormwater or the office space, right? So, it's just looking at the cost of the design elements, and then eventually the flare is included there, and the electrical, but not the other items that will be studied, but won't be at this point. They're not proceeding. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Keller, the $20 million does include the administrative final design and construction as we believe it will happen.
Administrative, yeah.
Right
Okay.
now, it's a little up in the air how we will do it. This is our best estimate. And then, yes, it doesn't include the electrical final design, which is stormwater will be implemented as part of that. Cogen, no, it doesn't include any upgrades. We have a power purchase agreement with Cal Power for our cogen, and so we haven't added any construction costs in for that element because we don't believe we will probably have any hard costs. It would probably be a power purchase agreement.
Go ahead.
I was just curious about SCADA. Is that tied in with any of this, or is it separate?
Oh, excellent. I did forget to my last picture is our fiber optic control room. We are looking to be running new fiber as part of this project. SCADA, not necessarily, but the backbone of what the fiber we would be to help clean that up, help increase cybersecurity, things like that.
So without discounting, I'll come back to you. Without discounting the that fourth bullet there on staffing, storage, public outreach, I'm confused. You quickly went over that. I'm confused on the nexus of that bullet to something called electrical distribution upgrades and why that gets in here. I mean, I don't doubt that it's all needed, but why does that get in here under this title?
If we go back to it's partly because of the enormous amount of coordination that takes place, but we also have to, we're envisioning as we're talking about construction sequencing even at this point, that we would be constructing a new substation adjacent to our existing substation, tying over, we're going to need the space. We also know that substation D, which is on the back side of the plant, is going to need to be moved completely, and because of when we did our master plan, the biosolids haul-out area, that actually has to get completely moved, or that's what we anticipate. So we're anticipating it moving to more on the other side where we've got storage containers potentially, and it's all a snowball effect. So at this stage, it has to be all well coordinated on where everybody's moving to, what's moving, what's not, so we can get a very solid base plan.
So let's kind of go back to discussions we've had here before on where the future land grabs are for water operations down there. So would that part of the plan on what you're going to do with admin areas right now and what they're going to do, would that come back to the commission for comments?
It absolutely can.
I mean, because we've talked about how do we get across the street and grab some available land, and is that where admin would go? And I guess my concern would be that the work result of this process would just be to move it here, but that would only be the 10-year answer, and in 10 years you'd still have to go look for somewhere else to put it across the street down the road. And would it be better now just to go down the road or across the street right now? Does that make sense?
It does. And if it's the wish of the commission for us to bring this back at certain touch points, so to speak, we would be more than happy to do that.
I think that'd be great, and just
provide
let you
updates.
decide when those are. And I think you've heard this interest item, at least for sure from me before. So I'd be welcome to. Mr. Keller, do you have more questions?
Just a question, following up on the first question. So how was the selection process from Brown and Caldwell? How was that decided compared to the two? What was the decision criteria that were used for that?
It was a challenging decision because both firms provided excellent proposals and they interviewed very well. Some of the determining factors were project management and the ability to foresee and that vision of putting all four of these projects and melding them into one, and understanding the level of effort that it would take. Two was the amount of detail. Brown and Caldwell really dove into the details. They really thought this through. That was their infographic at the beginning of how is this all going to work together. And they really performed and interviewed as a cohesive team. And those were some of the differentiators, as well as their electrical engineers specifically. They had a group and a number of them that were licensed to practice in California, where Carrillo's lineup had not as many that were licensed in California that would be doing the work, and that we felt was important.
Anybody else?
No, I would just basically say that's exactly the kind of information I would hope would have been outlined in the staff report, and I hope you do that when it goes on to council. And is there a reason? Is it a timing issue for you in terms of not being able to have that report, that information in the report before it comes here?
Absolutely. Mr. Chair, Commissioner Davis, part of the problem is council is dark for several weeks in August. So if I didn't come to you today and I don't get to council in August,
Yep.
I don't start
Got it.
until September.
It
was challenging for us.
I assumed as much. Okay, so anyway, I would make the motions for staff recommendation with in addition that staff report back to Water Commission as the project proceeds.
I'll second.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Perfect. Unanimous. Thank you very much. Then we'll move on to the Stage 3 drought update.
Great.
Ms.
Thank
Dyer.
you. Thank you. My name's Kelly Dyer. I'm the water supply manager, and I will be providing the drought update this morning. So we'll walk through the drought status, the demand status, water supply status, and then review the water supply strategy. So this is our drought monitor that's prepared by several federal agencies, including NOAA. And as you can see, really the entire state had a dry year this year. Our particular region is categorized as being in a severe drought. It's now official per the county records that we have had the 7 driest consecutive years in recorded history in our area. And we have maintained our drought emergency declaration, even though countywide it is showing a severe drought. Local conditions can vary, and here on the South Coast, we've been in our most severe drought declaration, maintaining our emergency. So our demand status, this is one of my favorite charts. So I brought it back. It's included in the Water Resources Manager's report every month, but this shows our water demands going back to the 1980s. And so here was the decline in water use in the last major drought, which after that ended, water use slowly increased, but it never returned to where it was before. And then here we are in this drought where we've had a similar decline in water use, and our drought is continuing. So we are at about 10,000 acre feet per year of demands currently. And this shows our, it's a little hard to read the font, but it's our population and water use going back to the early, I guess it would be late 1800s. So the green line is our population over time, and you can see it. The slope of the increase has really diminished in the last couple decades compared to previous decades. And the red line is our water use. So you can see it had increased with population. In the 1980s is when our water conservation program was formally established. And following that period, we've had a decline in water use. Our water use currently at about 10,000 acre feet, if you follow it across the chart, is about what it was in the 1950s, even though our population is almost double what it was back then. So this shows our 12-month running average for conservation. The top line is our 2013 water use, which is the state's metric for pre-drought demand. And the blue line is our target for the 30% conservation. The red line is where we're, what our actual demands are. So coming in right on target, we were at 29% for the month of June. Our 12-month average is at 34%, which still exceeds the 30% target that we currently have. This is our water sales revenue by month. We don't have the June numbers yet, but overall for the year, we did not see any issues with our revenues coming in below what we had planned. That was really the intent of showing this chart, was to see if there's any shortfalls in revenue, and we expect to end the year currently above our planned revenue projections. Water supply status. So Gibraltar Reservoir is currently at about 87% of capacity. We have had challenging water quality this year. Partially, it was really, we had the Thomas fire, and then really the first flush of that is what came into the reservoir. We did not get significant inflows that would cause significant spilling and flush that out. So we have had to reduce the amount of water we're using from Gibraltar compared to last year. We are diverting some water, blending it with our other sources. We've been diverting since May, and we're currently at about 4 acre feet per day, which is roughly about a third of the rate we were able to divert when the water quality was better last year. Kachuma is at about 38% of capacity. That's 73,000 acre feet. City's stored Kachuma supply is about 7,000 of that. We are anticipating a downstream water rights release of about 10,000 acre feet to begin next month. Kachuma Operation and Maintenance Board General Manager Janet Gingras worked very closely with Bruce Wales, who's the general manager of the Santa Ynez River Water Conservation District, who's the agency overseeing those downstream water rights. And we're able to come to an agreement on this release amount of 10,000 acre feet, which helps to postpone when we would need to install our emergency pumping facility at Kachuma, which once the lake levels at Kachuma drop below our intake level, we have to install this emergency pump facility to pump it out and get it into Tecolote Tunnel. So that was a really great cooperation among the downstream interests and COMB, and it was sufficient to meet the objectives for downstream groundwater recharge. So if conditions remain dry next winter, the emergency pump facility is expected to be needed by next summer. It would have to be operational. COMB did review various installation options recently, and I will be covering those in the COMB update in the next item. This chart shows our Kachuma storage. So the black line is the storage during the last drought of 1986 to 93 period, and the green line is our current drought. And so you can see the reservoir level really tracked really closely to where we were in the last major drought. However, this drought has extended for a longer period of time. We're now in year 7. And that's where we're at the 40% capacity. We did not receive any inflows to Kachuma this spring at all. So it didn't really, we didn't have any significant increase in water supply there. A lot's changed since the last drought, though. I would like to say we did not have the fish requirements for environmental releases downstream of Kachuma in the last drought. This drought was also much drier, so we had fewer inflows. And so I think it's pretty remarkable that we were able to maintain similar storage levels despite having drier conditions and also having environmental releases that didn't exist back then. The Kachuma member units have been working together to develop a joint request for next year's allocations from the Kachuma project. The reclamation would make a determination on allocations by October 1st. So working together, we modeled the projected available supply and determined by contract that would be 40% allocation. We sent a letter requesting that allocation to the county on June 18th. The county is the master contract holder with the Bureau of Reclamation, and it's their obligation to submit that request to the Bureau. The county has requested an extension before submitting our request to Reclamation. We don't know exactly why or what they're going to be doing, but their obligation is really just to pass along our request to Reclamation. So more to come on that. Imported water, we continue to maximize delivery to Kachuma up to the city's portion of the available pipeline capacity, which is approximately 280 acre-feet per month. We currently have about 890 acre-feet of imported water stored at Kachuma. We also have about 2,000 acre-feet stored in San Luis Reservoir. That includes the current year allocation from DWR as well as the supplemental water we purchased this year. DWR came out with their final 2018 allocation, which was 35%, which is 1,155 acre-feet per year to the city. And supplemental water, we did finish and execute a water exchange with Mojave Water Agency. The city's portion of that was 1,500 acre-feet. We do need to return 25% of that amount over the next 10 years. This was, cost-wise, I think probably one of the best deals we've seen in terms of supplemental water exchanges throughout the drought. So I was really pleased with the work that Central Coast Water Authority did on our behalf to negotiate this water purchase. Our total water debt as it stands right now is about 3,700 acre-feet, and that includes the Mojave Water Agency portion.
On the max max deliveries to Kachuma through Springs 219. So that means that you have right now in your hand the 280 acre feet incoming through Spring 219 from some other source.
Yes, thank you for pointing that out. We have enough supplemental water and state water to keep our portion of the pipe to Kachuma flowing full through through spring 2019. Spring 2019. At that point, we would have to look for additional water purchases, and we're projecting it would be about 2,000 acre feet next spring. If we have a dry winter, that we'd be looking for additional water. So we did budget in the FY19 budget. It's $1.5 million for additional water purchases if needed in the drought fund, plus $500,000 for conveyance of that water.
And people forget this all the time, so I'm just going to repeat it and let you verify. But the reason we continue to do that is two reasons. One, we need the water, but the second reason is if we give up our slice of the pie and the pipe, we lose it, right?
If we don't use it, someone else, it becomes available for someone else, and it is a cost. We're weighing the cost effectiveness for us because our water rates pay for more than just the supplemental water. It pays for operation of the whole system as well. It's more cost effective for us to purchase this water than it would be to have a shortage.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Groundwater, so we currently have 2 wells online. It's really just for seasonal use. They're in storage unit 1, which was interestingly in artesian conditions this spring. So we have those wells online, but I think we'll shut them down by August or September. And we are monitoring for seawater intrusion and water levels as well. So we'll have our next sampling results for chlorides probably in the next month. They weren't ready for today. But it's a minimal amount of pumping, which I'll show in the Water Resources Manager's report compared to our pumpage in the last drought. So I don't think that this pumping will have a significant impact on our groundwater basins for the short period that they're online. Our desalination project continues to operate in full production mode. We have been working with IDE to plan an open house. That has tentatively been scheduled for August 18th, although we won't be able to really confirm that date until early August, just to make sure nothing comes up prior to that open house. We're planning for about 180 people to go on tours throughout the day. Plus, there's also going to be the annex yard will have areas for people who didn't get to go on the tour, but they can still get information, and we'll have a bunch of booths and information available for them. Recycled water, our plant continues to operate. Well, our plant maximum production is 1.7 MGD when it's in operation. Our secondary aeration project is expected to wrap up in early 2019, which we would have to go through testing to verify this, but we anticipate it would increase the production up to 3 MGD at that point. The plant is currently down for emergency repairs. We had some failures in June and July. Although we expect the plant will be back online at the end of July, staff is working very hard to do everything they can to get it back online as soon as possible. And we have, for the month of July, we've turned on the Valley Verde non-potable well that comes out of storage unit 3, which is our other basin that we don't use for potable water use. That does augment our recycled water system supply. And for our water supply strategy, this is something we reviewed in more detail back in May. And it's the same chart, but I wanted to refresh everyone's memory and talk about our next steps. So we had This is all based on our long-term water supply plan policies, but it's been adapted based on our current conditions. We have two scenarios. One is where we're able to use our Gibraltar water where it's blended up to 50% with Kachuma water. And then we have another scenario on the next slide, which assumes we can't use any Gibraltar due to water quality. So based on where we're at right now, we'll probably end up somewhere in between these two scenarios. So we are currently in year 7, and we project out for the next 3 years what our supplies will look like. And just going from the bottom, the purple bar is recycled water. The dark blue is our Kachuma allocation. So we've actually, in our planning, assumed no additional Kachuma allocations. The medium blue is our Kachuma carryover. Any water from previous years' allocations that we were able to hold on to and store for future use. The light blue is...
Mr. Chair, in year 8, the Kachuma carryover jumps real big. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yes, so in this scenario, we're assuming that we can use quite a bit of Gibraltar water, in which case we could carry over our Kachuma for 1 more year.
Good, thanks.
The yellow is groundwater, so you can see if we're able to divert that much from Gibraltar, we wouldn't have to turn on our wells this summer. We're not seeing the levels that were in this scenario, which is why we've turned on 2 wells, but we would keep it to a limited amount of groundwater pumping. The green is our state water allocations, which was 35% this year. And the orange is supplemental water purchases that we have been doing to keep the pipe flowing full and have built up storage at Kachuma to some degree. The green is our desalination water, and then we have our 30% conservation target over the next several years. And assuming that the community can maintain that target or exceed it, we do have some shortage in 2021, which we'll have to address next spring. If next winter remains dry, we will have to take some action to close the gap in 2021. And one of the things we'll be bringing back for discussion this fall is a conversation on additional water use restrictions and development restrictions for consideration that would later be recommended in the spring if needed. And so this is the chart showing what it looks like without any use of Gibraltar. So again, we have a gap in 2021, although it's something we can address next spring if conditions remain dry.
So the year we're in ends in September, right? The end of September?
That's correct.
So which one of these 2 choices are we closer to right now for that year?
That's a good question. It's only been about 2 months since we've really been diverting Gibraltar water, so it's a little early for me to tell, but I would say we're probably tracking at this point, it would be in the middle or closer to the no Gibraltar.
Okay, thanks.
Just trying to understand the timeline that you just laid out when you said bring it back in the fall, this coming fall, but we won't know yet if we have a wet winter?
That's correct. I think it's really in response to some previous questions that we've received regarding messaging on conservation. I want to make it clear we are voluntarily asking people to let their lawns go. That's always been our consistent messaging. It's really important we continue on that path, that people will let their lawns go. We're all in this together, and that's an action that people can take that we will help them with. We have a lot of rebates available for people who want to go down that process. We have also been hearing from people in the community on the development messaging is one of our more difficult messages and how it relates to conservation. So in order for us to have a conversation about a lawn ban, we have to couple that with a discussion on development, just from a messaging perspective. So we're going to have that conversation next fall, and we'll have a joint presentation with community development. We are working with them currently to update all of the numbers on what are the demands from new development that we've actually seen. We had that information through 2013, and so we're looking for additional data that covers the last 5 years as well. And so we'll have that data available by this fall to have that conversation.
So we'll have that information then going into winter, seeing how it is for us, and then deciding in the spring how it all will play out.
Exactly.
Okay,
Yeah, we
thank
won't
you.
be making any recommendations this fall for implementing any of those actions. It is really just to start the conversation. The winter remains dry, then the spring is when we would need to implement some of them.
Excellent, thank you.
Mr. Chair, just a comment. In August, we're going to talk about our work program for the year and everything else. I would hope that we'd have at least some preliminary discussion of these issues, that is additional conservation and the whole development question and the lawn watering ban. It's a time when we can basically kind of chat about it in that regard. So I'm hoping we can at least open that discussion next month.
Well, I was looking for a line that I saw, and I realized it's probably it's in the staff report on a project today at Planning Commission, but I'm going to send it to you. But there's a really nice sentence in there on the when they start matching up policy with how a project applies to policy. But there's a line in there on water that just doesn't talk about water, but it talks about it kind of talks about five words having to do with community. So the economic, the social, the environmental, and it clearly is the discussion that you want to have with people who say, what the heck, you're putting in new units with water over there when we're in a drought. But it's not just the water. There's a whole bunch of other stuff to consider there, the social, the economic, the fabric of the community kind of thing. And I'll find that line and send it to you, because I think you know this already, that's the discussion you want to have, but that's the discussion we should have in August. And
Yeah, exactly. And I think when you look at just the water aspect, I've added to the staff report a sentence on how much water is used by new development, and it's less than 1%, I think 0.2% of our total water demands right now. So you really do have to weigh how much are we really saving by taking additional action versus the other impacts to the community of halting development. But it's the messaging issue too, because then, there's the perception of development. If we're not getting the message out about the benefits of these projects, then we're getting backlash on the water conservation side. So it's a messaging challenge I think we'll have to address, and we're looking for support from the other city departments as well in having those discussions.
I just want to add to that. I'm happy you're bringing in community development on that, because, and I'm sure we'll discuss this further, but I'm not sure how appropriate it is for Water Commission to be promoting development or not promoting development if we're staying within our water management. And so I think it is an important conversation to have, whether that even is your messaging to do or not.
Absolutely. I totally agree. I think our role is really just to put out the facts on how much water is used by new development projects, and that's it. And we really don't need to be involved anymore, from the staff level at least, in those discussions. And I think that's Water Commission's, I recognize that line too, so.
So one of the big items that's growing a lot is water purchases, city capacity. So in terms of the ability to actually find water that's available and the cost of that water, is that something that has been? Just tell us what your feeling is on that.
So the gap in 2021 could be addressed through increasing our conservation target, which all of our water rates are based on the 30%, so we'd have to do an adjustment. The way that our rates are structured, majority of our revenue comes from a volumetric water rate. So we do see fluctuations in our revenues when we increase conservation. And so there's the demand management side that we'll have to look at options. And then the supply side where we could look at options, and we're currently, our current long-term water supply plan points to desalination as our backup plan for emergency shortages. So we'll have to have look at options for what it would cost to expand desal to fill the gap. And maybe it's a combination, it's either increasing conservation or increasing our supply, or a combination of both. But it will also depend on what type of rainfall we get next year that helps to fill that gap as well. Okay. Yes, and I will say, just one more thing to this. These projections assume no additional supplier inflows to Gibraltar or Kachuma. So to the extent we do get some inflows to either of those sources, it would help as long as the water quality is treatable.
Can we go back to the conservation by month slide? As you get there, over the last few years, we've asked the community for extreme conservation, and they've met it time and time again, which has been amazing. So I guess where I get concerned with this slide is we look back in July 17, and we've got like a 40% conservation rate, which carries us through the winter months where we don't get our 30% conservation because less water is used overall in the winter. It's harder to conserve, so that kind of has evened out. So my concern is if we start looking at March, our per month water use is starting to go up and match that 30% conservation, where if we look at past years, it should be going down right now, not up. So I guess I'm a little bit concerned looking at this graph that we're not going to actually keep hitting that 30% conservation if we continue on this trend, even though the community's been amazing. So I guess that's a concern I have seeing this. And I know
absolutely, and if we start seeing that the community is not meeting the targets, that's the time when we do need to take additional action on the regulatory side. That's where we would have additional water use restrictions to make up for the gap if we're not seeing that the targets were met.
So I guess my concern is not that we should have more regulatory right now. I'm not saying that. I'm wondering if there's additional community outreach we should be doing, because water use shouldn't be going up in order for us to meet these. What I don't want to happen is in 3 months we're like, we missed our window where the conservation should have happened, which should have been July, August, September, right? That's where we should see these big gaps in water savings from our community. That's what they've done historically. And if we get to October or even if we get to, August and, now we're communicating now it's September, we've already missed that opportunity. So I don't know if there's a plan. I know the conservation team works really hard, and Madeline does an excellent job, but I'm just wondering if there's a messaging plan like, hey guys, we're doing good, but we could be doing better, and it'll help us in the long run now.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. I think we should consider that. And I know it's been complicated with the development messaging as well, but I certainly think from a conservation perspective in our messaging and our water documents, we need to point out that we're right on the cusp of our target right now. We're not in a place where we're substantially exceeding it, and so keep doing what you're doing, but there's room to do more.
Yeah, and that if we don't, there's a risk that at this rate we will have to have additional regulations in the spring, which I don't think is always hard for everybody. So I'd rather have the community do it voluntarily, and it looks like we're on track to have to ask for more regulations, which is not something. It's a hard thing to do. So I guess that was one thought I had. Moving on to desal, you mentioned that there'd be a room in the annex yard for people who didn't get to take tours. Is there going to be a process for tours? Are there, what's that gonna look like?
And Madeline Ward is the one who's been working very hard to organize all this. There will be a process. There's only a small group that can go on a tour at a time, so there's going to be several small groups cycling throughout the day. And I think there's going to be a sign-up sheet, so it's really first come, first serve on who signs up. And if you didn't get onto the sign-up sheet, you could still come and next door and get information. There will be more tours. This is the first time opening it up to the public, and we're going to see how it goes and work out some of the kinks. And then eventually, probably a few months down the road, we would try to schedule regular tours for people on a more regular basis. So this isn't going to be the only opportunity for people to come and see the plant. There will be future tours as well.
Yeah, maybe just consider that there are maybe some open to the public times and some set scheduled times, because I could see that being a disaster if you've got 300 people showing up at 8 a.m. and then waiting around all day to try to get into a tour. That could not help the PR of the desal plant if it was, if there was some time certain and some, hey, you can't sign up, come and we'll try to get you in. Maybe if it's a mix. I know I would hate to go and stand there for like 4 hours and wait to get a tour. I'd probably be pretty upset. Recycled water. Can we talk a little bit about that?
That we can, if it's related to the recent occurrences. That's going to be part of the water resources managers and wastewater managers report,
Okay.
which is at the end of the meeting. So
I'll hold on to those questions then. But I do want to talk about that. Okay. Thank you.
Other questions?
Yes, I want to second Commissioner Bernie's observation on that particular graph, and I hope that, again, if just a second, you see the savings that we had during last summer, and now we're going into the summer, and that trend is up. If July and August continue to be on that trend, we're going to be again, way off target in that regard. So I would hope that the discussion we have in August, again, kind of looks at the what-ifs. If that continues, what are the things we're looking at in terms of regulation? Because as I recall, the lawn watering ban, we're talking 300 to 800 acre feet max, but a lot of that's already been, kind of in place. So again, I hope that discussion becomes, we open that door for discussion in August where we can, chat about it. And I don't totally understand resting groundwater basins, but again, we keep talking about how we're going to rest our groundwater basins, but then as I look forward, we're continuing basically to go to the groundwater as a constant source. Just in simple terms, what is the plan or goal to use up essentially the remaining safe yield, quote unquote, get to that part and then stop regardless?
well, yes, and so groundwater is considered our backup an emergency supply when surface water is not available. So when Gibraltar filled, that was our opportunity to start resting the wells and shift to our surface water that was available. The planned projections for groundwater supply are within the estimated drought yield of what's remaining in storage without causing significant seawater intrusion. And it's based on USGS modeling. And so at that point, yes, I mean, the what we've shown in these projections would be what we expect to be remaining. So if the drought extends to an 11th year, we would not plan to use groundwater at that point. And we'd have to have another source or to replace that.
So I would think, again, in our August discussion, kind of the critical path thinking relative to expansion of desal, because that's going to be the only real option that we might have. When does that start to come into play? So hopefully all that comes together in a, if you will, a strategic discussion in August.
Go ahead.
I just want to come back to that again in response to Commissioner Bernie's comments. I'd really encourage decoupling the message from development. I just heard you say that it's complicated to message to people to conserve because it's tied in with the development message. Water Commission, in my view, does not need to be making a development message at all. That questions about that can be referred back to council, can be referred back to community development. Your message, our message in water is to conserve, and it should not be a complicated message about, someone having questions about development. I question that there's development. The rest of the council does not share that view, but really can go back to ask city council, ask the community development planning. It's really not the water department's job to monitor, either encourage or discourage development. And I think the message needs to be to conserve, each individual to conserve, and that shouldn't be a complicated message at all.
Thank you for those comments. Yeah.
Kind of on that note, too, I'll just get in my monthly rant on resetting the bar graph. I know you're going to complicate it and say it's part of the long-term water plan, it's part of the rate thing, but, it's clear to me that between 10,000 and 11,000 acre feet is the number where you should be conserving from. We shouldn't be conserving from 15,000 or 16,000 acre feet anymore. We did conserving, and we did please conserve more, then we did super extraordinary, thank you conserving. Soon we're going to be asked to do exemplary on top of that conserving. There's fatigue for this. There's way fatigue for this. The development thing is part of it in the line at the grocery store. So if you want to decouple that, that's great. But you have to reset this thing and say, if you drew a line on that thing on what water use was, because that tells a different story when you get back to 13 and maybe even 12, because water use is between 10 and 11, almost the entire horizontal part of that bar graph. We just accumulated more water on that bar graph. And so if that's our new norm water use, that should be our new norm starting water use. And then we start messaging again on top of that, whatever that top of that bar chart is, 10,000, 11,000 acre feet a year. To me, it's just that white keeps growing, the red keeps adding in. That white and red, the next column will turn into all white. Then you'll want to add another red on there. It's just, drives me crazy every month to see that. And then where and how is the conservation conversation going to fit into the state legislation that eventually mandates you can only use 55 gallons per person per day now and 50 eventually? I know we're closer to the 50, but pretty soon when that happens, it's not a matter of conservation, it's a requirement. And the whole message becomes a little different, doesn't it?
Yes, and I think I'd love to bring back a discussion on what the new bills mean, but the state is still sort of sorting out
How to implement.
it, and we don't really know what it means for the city, probably for another couple of years.
Okay, it's a long time.
But we do have, our water use levels are some of the lowest in the state in terms of per capita. So
If you go south, people must be really panicking, right? When they're in the 90s and hundreds, right? Yeah, so, but.
And it's challenging too when you relate it, lot size has something to do with it as well. So
People are in your family has something to do with it too. So, okay. All right. Should we
right.
move on?
yes, let's
Okay,
move on
So move
to,
on to the other agencies report.
okay. All right, so I'm just giving a brief update on the joint powers agencies that the city is a member. So the first one is Kachuma Operation and Maintenance Board. That's a JPA consisting of 5 Kachuma member units, and they're responsible for certain operation and maintenance responsibilities that were delegated from the Bureau of Reclamation. Specifically, they're responsible for the conveyance facilities of Kachuma water to the South Coast and South Coast member units. So their last board meeting was on Monday, June 25th at 2 p.m. The next board meeting will be Monday, July 23rd. At the last meeting, the board reviewed and approved the FY19 budget, and that the city's share of the COMB net operating budget was $2.5 million for FY19. That is within the amount of the city's fiscal year 2019 adopted budget. We have a timing issue where our budget is, budget preparation occurs before Combs does, so we did have sufficient funds for planned for the city's budget to cover comb expenses. The board also received a presentation on deployment of the emergency pumping barge. There were 3 options that were considered. One was full deployment of the pilings and the barge. One was partial deployment, where only the pilings would be deployed and then the barge would come later. And then the third was delay deployment of everything altogether. And the third alternative was deemed the most flexible and cost effective. It does involve an execution of a change order with Cushman, the contractor, for $178,000 roughly. That is necessary so that the installation can occur at lower lake levels. A larger crane would be needed. We have muddy conditions, and it just they would need to use different equipment. So that $178,000 change order allows us to delay deployment altogether, hopefully see what happens next winter. If we don't need to install it at all, there were major cost savings. So COMB will continue to monitor the lake level projections and assess every month where we stand on when deployment would be needed.
I had a question about about that pumping barge. Did I think you guys had mentioned at one point that Comb was looking at alternate options to the barge? Did they ever do anything like that?
At one point, there was discussion of a more permanent solution, of maybe just installing a buried or sinking a pipeline, at least to the Site 1 location. It would still be a temporary barge situation unless there were options to figure out a more permanent solution for pumping as well. But that, I think, was in the preliminary design phase, and there hasn't been, I haven't seen any work come out of that preliminary design for right now. So
There was no like study or report or anything on options for like a permanent solution to this, because I know we keep coming back to this, and I think we're going to keep coming back to this in the future. We're going to run into this issue again. If there was some sort of permanent solution, I mean, we're spending millions of dollars putting temporary facilities in each time we do this, so I don't know how much a full-scale like permanent solution will cost, but I still feel like it would be a good idea to like at least do some sort of like just a preliminary study on here's 3 or 4 options, and here's what it would cost us in the long run, and make sure that we're doing the right thing every time we, bring the subject back up. So.
I'm the COMB representative, and the conversation continues to happen. The issue is with downstream interests do not want any type of permanent pipeline in. So it's really, it'd be most cost effective to have something permanent put in, or even semi-permanent or a sunk line. It's really that the other agencies that draw from Kachuma don't want there to be other access where we could potentially draw water without their acknowledgement. So it does continue to come up monthly that we talk about that. Every time we talk about the barge, we continue to talk about it, and it would definitely be more cost effective. And the COMB member agencies would far prefer that. It's just that other agencies who draw from the lake are not in favor, at this point.
Okay, so the next one would be Kachuma Conservation Release Board. Councilmember Sneddon also is our representative to this JPA. It consists of 3 Kachuma member units, which are the City of Santa Barbara, Montecito Water District, and Goleta Water District. That JPA was formed to protect our Kachuma water rights, and CCRB represents the city through the state water rights order process as well as the federal biological opinion consultation processes. We are still awaiting a final water rights order. We've been waiting for quite some time. The draft was released in December 2016, I believe, and CCRB commented on the draft. We've been waiting for a final ever since. I think the latest I heard was the state was tentatively scheduling a closed session in August, and then the public release of the final draft would come out shortly after, and there'd be a hearing in probably October timeframe, although I wouldn't pencil your calendars on that because it's changed so many times. We also are still awaiting a public draft biological opinion that we don't have a public draft that would be available for release at this point. So the last CCRB meeting was on July 12th, and that was primarily closed session with no reportable action. Central Coast Water Authority is a JPA consisting of 8 member agencies. It was formed to finance, construct, manage, and operate Santa Barbara County's local facilities for distribution and treatment of state water. And I attended the operating committee meeting on July 12th. The next board meeting will be August 23rd, if anyone's interested in attending. Just some highlights from the operating committee meeting was statewide rainfall remains below average, and we've had rapid snowmelt this year. Oroville storage, which is where the spillway emergency occurred, was kept low this year to avoid use of the spillway altogether. So that's where our water originates, and they were managing it at levels so that they don't need to use the spillway. Repair costs are estimated about $1 billion to repair Oroville. DWR is seeking FEMA reimbursement, although they have not succeeded in that at this point. San Luis Reservoir is fairly full. It's at about 750,000 acre feet of storage. The state water capacity of that reservoir is 1 million acre feet. So even though it's pretty full, there's really no chance of spilling this year. Springtime is usually when we have that risk. So I think even though it's fairly full, our water is safe, at least until next spring. DWR final allocation was 35%. There was discussion on the state water contract extension. The negotiations on the contract extension occurred several years ago. The main thing that it does is it extends the contract 50 years. So our current contracts expire in 2035. This would extend the contract period to 2018. This allows an extended repayment period for bonds. So right now when we see these costs such as Oroville or other expenses come in, we have a 17-year period to pay off any bonds that are issued. This would extend that period so that it would reduce our annual commitments. Legislative hearings are scheduled for August. DWR can execute the contract amendment 60 days after the legislative hearings. If there are no litigation challenges, which is probably unlikely, DWR would only need a portion of the contractors to execute it for it to apply to everybody. If there is litigation, this would likely have to go to all the contractors, and our current contract holder for state water is the County Board of Supervisors. So at some point, we'll be bringing this to Water Commission and Council to make a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors. However, we're still waiting on some information on what's called the Evergreen Clause, which is in our current contract. We want to understand what happens to those agencies who don't sign the contract extension. So there's an Evergreen Clause that allows you to still continue to receive water, but we don't have very much information on what that means from a financial perspective and how we will get our bills. So we think that DWR will need to answer that question for the legislative hearings, what happens to those agencies that don't sign. And so I'm thinking will probably be coming to Water Commission and Council in September or October timeframe, and then it would go to the Board of Supervisors in late fall. Regarding the state water contract reassignment, this is where there's discussion of changing the contract from being with the County Board of Supervisors and transferring it over to the Central Coast Water Authority. CCWA is still waiting for a letter of support from DWR, although DWR has finished all their analyses and it has said verbally that that letter is forthcoming. So once that letter is received, then the next steps will be meetings with the County Board of Supervisors. And finally, for the Cal Water Fix update, a financing JPA has been set up. Some agencies are already participating, including Metropolitan Water District. Metropolitan has said that they will pick up $10.7 billion of the total $17 billion estimated cost. That covers their share of the cost as well as the costs of the federal contractors. So in the long term, if the federal contractors want some of the supply benefits from the Cal Water Fix, they will have to work out a deal with Metropolitan because Metropolitan will be getting that share. And that's, I think, all that I have for today for the JPA updates.
Any questions? All right, let's move along to Water Resources Manager's report. You're going to tag team us?
Yes.
Okay.
And I think we have it in PowerPoint form now. Oh, here we go. This one. Okay. Well, this is not very legible on the screen, but everyone has a printout of it, and I thought I'd walk through what the columns are. This is something we present every month, but we don't really go through it in detail. This is something we put together at the start of every new water year, is our planned water supplies for each month, and we track how we did compared to where we thought we would have been at the beginning of the year. Of course, our plans change more frequently, and we actually update our plans on an ongoing basis. So you won't see that the planned numbers reflect our current strategy just because we have to be more dynamic. But the intent is to, on an annual basis, show how we compared. So our Kachuma, we have our Kachuma deliveries, and we have Gibraltar deliveries. Gibraltar, we had assumed we wouldn't have any supplies, so now we have been diverting some Gibraltar water. We have Devil's Canyon, which is a tributary that confluences with the Santa Ynez River. It's up near our Gibraltar Reservoir, very small creek, so we didn't have sufficient inflows to divert. Mission Tunnel is how we receive our Gibraltar water is conveyed through Mission Tunnel, and then we do get groundwater seepage along the way. So that reflects the groundwater seepage that's occurring through Mission Tunnel. And then we have our groundwater production, which is Storage Unit 1 and Foothill Basin, which are two potable. They're used for potable water supplies. And then we have Storage Unit 3, which is our non-potable groundwater that augments the recycled water system. We have desalination and then state water. You can see we're actually using more for the month of June, more state water than was thought to be planned back in September, October of 2017. That's because we still have storage of state water at Kachuma. We have about 900 acre feet remaining. Once that runs out, you'll see the shift over to use of Kachuma project water. Net overlap water, those are for those areas where the city and Goleta have overlaps in their boundaries. So there's some city customers that are served by Goleta Water District, and then there's some Goleta Water District customers that are served by the city facilities. And so every month we true up what was the net exchange at the end of the year. any water that we are owed, the Goleta Water District will credit back to us at Kachuma. So as of right now, it's at 105 acre feet that Goleta would owe the city at the end of the water year. No groundwater recharge is currently occurring. We do have some wells that have injection capability, but it's treated water that comes off of our distribution system, and we are planning a pilot project for that type of injection, but it would likely occur once we have more surface water available at Kachuma.
Just in how to read the chart. So if it's water production, groundwater recharge, that would be water going in?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. And so at some point, there was this table has been around for decades, I think. And at some point, there was a suggestion to track how much water we're putting into the groundwater basin. So it's in the table, although we don't have any occurring right now, and it's not. You're right. It's not necessarily production.
And if you were putting water in and counting it as production, it would be coming from one of these other columns?
From the groundwater production, correct. There's, on the left-hand side, the production is what we're actually pumping out of the ground.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Keller was here, he would tell you when, but they used to purposely run water from somewhere down Mission Creek and get it into groundwater storage. That's about all I remember him saying.
And then the blend water, that is potable water that goes into our recycled water system. It's not a normal occurrence, but when our recycled plant is down, that's the backup supply to that system. And then we have potable system total. So the potable system total is really the total demand, potable water demand on our potable system. Recycled system is the demands on the recycled water system. And then we have Elistero process usage, which is fed by recycled water as well. And our water system total is the sum of those three previous columns, which are potable system demands, recycled system demands, plus Elistero process usage. So that's just a summary of the table. If anyone ever has any questions about it, I'm happy to answer them. We've already covered this chart, so I think I'll skip our total water demand going back to the 80s. This is our gallons per capita per day water use. And the red line was our goal based on the 20 by 2020 law that was put in place. And so you can see we're well below our 20 by 2020 goals. And so the blue line is our 12-month running average of total water use. That's at about 84 gallons per capita per day. Residential water use only is the green line. So just eyeballing the average is usually closer to about 55 for our residential customers. That's indoor and outdoor. The next page is our Gibraltar rainfall. And this was a relatively dry year. I think we had about 11.83 inches for the year. Not the driest. The driest was in 2012, 2013, which we had 8.88 inches. Let's see. Outlook for temperature the next 3 months are projected to be warmer than normal. And this is the rainfall projections, which don't have a lot of meaning because our rainy season is pretty much over. So it's equal chances of being above normal, above or below or normal with zero rainfall, basically, because we don't have rain over the summer. Gibraltar Reservoir, this shows our total water that's stored in Gibraltar. You can see the somewhat declining trend of total capacity. This was an interesting year. This was 2008 when the Zaka fire occurred. And you can see right afterwards, we lost about 2,000 acre feet of storage capacity. And then we went into a major drought. And so our reservoir is currently full, but we're dealing with the water quality challenges that result from fires. And we've already seen this chart.
Question on the Gibraltar. So you have the water quality. That water moves on to directly to our treatment system, or it passes through Cachuma before you have to treat it?
Gibraltar goes through Mission Tunnel into our treatment system.
So it affects directly the.
It does. And then whatever spills from Gibraltar then goes downstream to Cachuma. So it indirectly affects Cachuma, I suppose, too. Yeah, the Zaka fire burned 60% of our watershed. And then we've also been affected by the Ray fire and the Thomas fire in our Gibraltar watershed. Montecito with the Thomas fire, that burned 100% of their watershed going into Jameson Reservoir. So they're actually not able to divert at all right now because of the water quality impacts. Okay, so Foothill Basin, this is our water levels, and you can see it. We have about 60 monitoring wells, and so we're just showing a few select wells here, and it does fluctuate seasonally, but I tend to look at the top part of the line whenever it's at the peak. I like to compare the peaks, and so right now our Foothill Basin water levels are roughly where they were in the last drought, although we do have some data going back to the 50s that shows that water levels have historically been lower. And storage unit 1 water levels, this goes back to the 1980s, so you can see the pumping that occurred in the last drought, and then we really didn't use our groundwater basins at all for quite a long time, and we had full basins going into this drought, which was really helpful for how we have managed our supplies. But we have had some pumping here. Our water levels are, we had artesian conditions after we stopped pumping last spring, so they're very responsive. This basin is under pressure, and so when we start pumping, there's a significant response, very quick response. So they recover really quickly. What we're more concerned about is seawater intrusion in this basin.
Can we go back to the Foothill Basin for a second? I'm just, the blues look so similar to me. Is which line, the one that spikes high in the 80s? Is that a particular basin? Is that the San Roque Basin, or is that which?
This one here.
Yeah, and to earlier in time, 84. Yeah, that same line, but earlier.
So those are each individual wells, a well location, and you're right, the blues are a little difficult to see which one it is. See if
It's just, there are two different blues.
I would guess it's the San Roque well. I can verify that and get back to you next month. I'll have a different color for that one since it is hard to read.
So then it looks to me on this graph like our groundwater availability levels are going down over time. We're not recharging back to previous levels in time. Am I reading that right? I looked at the one blue line that looks sort of the one that stays roughly level. And which one is that blue? Is that Lorraine? So Lorraine looks like it stays roughly stable, but the others over time are dipping quite a bit.
That's correct. Yeah, we actually, in the Foothill Basin, we had to start increasing pumping because of water quality regulations at Cater Water Treatment Plant. Until we had our ozone upgrades, we had to blend our groundwater in order to meet our water quality regulations. once ozone was completed, then we went right into drought. And so we've actually had more pumping in Foothill going back to 2005. So it was in non-drought and drought conditions that we've been pumping. And you're right, there has been a decline in the water levels. It will probably take 5 to 10 years for those water levels to recover after we stop pumping. This is after 1991 when we stopped pumping, which you can see it by the red down at the bottom of the chart. That's the city pumping is the red. So once we stopped pumping, then you can see the water levels started to improve until about 2003 or 2004. Then we started pumping again, and then they came back down.
Is the Foothill Basin now resting? Or that's
Yes.
the one? Okay.
It is currently resting. We have 2 wells online in Storage Unit 1, and they will likely only be online for another couple months.
And then it will take several years for this to come back up.
Just based on observation from after the last drought, it took about 10 years or so for the water levels to go back up.
Thank you.
Okay, well, this is Elistero influent comparison. So it looks very similar compared to previous years. Oh, do you have this chart? Okay. Ms. Arroyo has this chart in her presentation, so she's going to cover that.
Thank you. Before I get started, I actually want to introduce 2 of our collection staff employees. It's always nice to put the faces to the folks who are doing the work. So out in our audience, we have Bradley Rare. He is our collection system superintendent. He is in charge of all of the collection system operations. And next to him is Del Escobar. He's our project coordinator in charge of the SLIP program. I'm pleased to report that we had our 3rd month of no spills. So we remain at 5 for the year. I'm showing the 5 spills by month and by primary cause. So 4 of the 5 were from roots and 1 is from debris. And there you'll see the volume spilled. We spilled about a little over 3,600 gallons from the 5 spills. Recovered, or volume not recovered is almost 1,600 gallons. From a miles clean perspective, this shows the blue is our city staff. They pretty consistently clean, on average, about 20 miles per month. After the Montecito incidents, we were a little bit less. We were supporting Montecito, and that's part of the deduction in mileage, but overall, we're doing very well for the year. We also have our on-call contractor who has started as well. We've had 2 cleaning contracts. And so, all in all, we have cleaned about 115 miles for the first 6 months of the year, which equates to about 38% of our system we have cleaned geographically. We've done a lot of acoustic testing so far this year. Part of it was in response to having 3 or 4 root spills right at the beginning of the year. We wanted to get ahead of it. This shows our acoustic test results. On the blue, those are the ones that are coming back as either good, fair. We've done a total of 1,300, almost 1,400 acoustic tests for the first 6 months of the year. About 1,100 of them came back as good as and fair. The green is poor or block, and that is about 264. When that happens, we go back and we do cleaning and or combination of inspection to try to determine why that came back as a poor score. And on average, what we've seen over the years, it's about 20% of our acoustics tests come back as poor or a block that require additional effort.
This is just for personal interest, but well, so people know too. So in my neighborhood, there was a lot of acoustic testing going on, and you can hear it, right? You hear the sounds, and then people were asking me like, well, if there's a problem, will they get a letter or a letter that they're all clear, or what is the timeline for when they might hear that their property has a problem, or what are the results of that? I mean, because you can hear it's going on, and then I was just wondering about the timeline, just from a practical standpoint.
Sure. Councilmember Sneddon, when we do acoustic testing, we are trying to cover a basin at a time, where we'll literally march down from the top of the basin, hit all of our sewer mains that need to be acoustically tested. And the test itself takes about 3 minutes, and we will come back with a score. That's just a screening number. It's testing the sewer main, not necessarily someone's actual lateral. What happens from there is depending on how many tests come back as per a block and how busy staff is. Sometimes we may have the luxury of doing some type of CCTV investigation to try to figure out what's the problem. Or if we get a lot of those low scores, we're just going to go ahead and clean them, because that's the fastest thing for us to do to ensure that we don't have spills. If we do some type of a CCTV investigation, we may find that someone's lateral is in poor condition, and then they might get a sewer lateral letter and that they have to inspect. We're turning those around, and you'll see a little bit later the sewer lateral inspection program. We're turning around those pretty quick. I would say within about a month, someone might expect to see that if we're TVing. For fog inspections, our fog inspectors done about 280 inspections so far this year. Just as a reminder, we have about 550 food service establishments in the city. So on average, we try to touch and speak with the owners at least once a year, if nothing else, to continue that public outreach and education component, because that's very important with the fog inspections.
I wanted to thank you for maybe last week at council for taking our structured number request, but recognizing the tone of the discussion and what we were really talked about in amending that time frame for the fog contract. It was thank you for doing that. It was the appropriate thing to do, I thought.
You're very welcome. As far as private spills go, I don't think we've reported on private spills to the Water Commission for some time, so I wanted to give you some history on that. This is what it's looked like as far as what has actually been reported and we've assisted with. There could be other private spills out there that property owners aren't reporting to us, don't need assistance with. But these are what the numbers have looked like from 2012. So far this year, we have 5 that we have been reported to us and responded to by us, which is significantly lower than what we've seen in the past. 1 was reported last month, so we only had 1. And I attribute a lot of this to our aggressive SLIP program. Here's a slide showing our SLIP program. The blue bars on the bottom, those are the letters that we send out on a monthly basis. You can see right there that we are increasing the number of inspections required. We're getting all sorts of information. Some of it's driven by development. Some of it is driven by if someone has a sewer lateral spill, we will ask them to do an inspection. Or if we're doing CCTV inspections, we notice something, we will put them into the SLIP program. On the green, those are letters that we have sent out regarding repair. So once someone actually turns in their video of their sewer lateral, we review it, and if there are repairs needed, another letter gets generated. So as you can see from the chart there, we're increasing the number of repairs that we're having private property owners do. On top is that gold line. That gold line is the number of sewer-wise or lateral to main connections that we are replacing on a monthly basis. That program is really escalating. We are on average doing 2 days per week, 3 appointments or three different laterals per each day, and we are now 2 months backlogged. So there are a lot of Ys that are being replaced, and that's really due to our very aggressive SLIP program. And I think it's also helping with our private and public spills. From a CCTV perspective,
I just had a question on the private spills. When you get called to assist on that, is that something that you guys have to report, or Or that's just you help out someone?
We do. We report them in CWIX, which is our, for the regional board. And I don't believe we are required to, but we do voluntarily.
Question, what do you mean by help out? What's the help that's provided to the private owner?
If we are notified that we have a private lateral spill, our crews will respond. They may have to help initiate cleanup so that it doesn't, as best as we can possibly do, make sure it doesn't go into storm drains, waters of the U.S. It's cleaned up properly. Sewer is a hazard to public health and safety, so
sure.
we do what we need to do to help make sure that the community stays as safe as possible when this happens. Our CCTV crew is hard at work. Our blue is our city staff inspections, and year to date they've inspected about 12 miles. Our green is our contractor. Again, we had a CCTV contract in place, and now we also have on-call CCTV contract. So year to date we are at 9 miles for the contractor for a total of about 21 miles. Some of this is new inspections. Some of this is re-inspect of our pipes that were found to be in previous years in poor condition. Moving over to our treatment plant, we received about 68,000 gallons of fog last month. It's fairly consistent what we received, and we did go to council and have Marburg's contract renewed until April, and I'll mention some next steps at the end of this presentation. As far as biosolids hauled, we were at about 160,000 dry tons, 160 dry tons, 160,000. I don't have my glasses on. I apologize for that. Combination of two of our haulers on the bottom in the green, that is going to be Liberty, and on the top that is going to be Ingle and Gray, who is our Santa Barbara County composter. As far as chemical costs, fairly consistent with last year as far as the treatment plant, or last month as far as the treatment plant is concerned. We are seeing a reduction in chemical because of tertiary being down. So we're at about 34,000 in chemical costs last month. And then power usage, we powered approximately 74% of El Estero last month with cogen, and the remaining was with SCE Power.
So with tertiary down, are we still meeting our water quality objectives? I mean, tertiary treatment is down. So is that not affecting our discharge in some way?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Keller, it doesn't affect water quality. What we do is tertiary is primarily for Title 22 use, so we send it out for recycled water users.
Okay.
So right now we are having to augment with potable water.
Well, that's the one.
As far as a discharge, we just have more going out of El Estero into the ocean, but we aren't violating any of our discharge permits.
Okay.
And finally, with influent flow to El Estero, we are remaining fairly flat, a little bit higher this last month in June. We were at 6.3 million gallons versus 6.1 last month. As promised, an update to our tertiary treatment. I apologize, I have to show this same picture again this month. The system has been down since I reported to you in June. On June 20th, we had a second catastrophic pipe failure. It has not been up and running since that time because we haven't been able to put the necessary measures in place to run it safely for staff, and that is our first priority. We have received a letter recommendation from a consultant on how to put it into service safely. We received that last Friday. We are working to get the equipment. Basically, they're called rupture discs. So they will, once it reaches a certain pressure, it will rupture at the rupture disc versus exceeding the pressure and having the pipe catastrophically fail, causing safety concerns. Because we've had two very, I will call them violent pipe failures. They're just very extreme, where someone could have very easily gotten hurt very badly. So we are hoping that we can get that equipment or those discs in a very quick amount of time and get this thing back up and running on or before the end of the month, and that is our goal. And then we will continue moving forward with some of the other recommendations, which are monitoring the pressure spikes and other equipment. But our first objective is to get it back into service as quick as possible. As far as the rate study, we will be at council on the 31st of July with a recommendation. When I came here last month and talked about the rate study, I don't believe we identified the consultant because we hadn't quite yet selected this consultant. We will be contracting with HDR engineers to do our rate study, and we have asked them to provide extra meetings to come in and speak with the commission and really go through a thorough understanding of the rates before we show up in February asking you to adopt a potential multi-year rate plan. And so we'll have several meetings over the course of the fall. And then as far as the FOG update, we were at council. We will be coming back either September, October timeline with the request for proposal in draft form so we can have a great conversation about what the objectives are. So that's the timeline that is on. And that concludes my presentation. Be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, recycled water. I've got two concerns. One is short-term, one is long-term. If I don't think this graph made it into the presentation, but the graph that shows recycled water production by source, we're currently blending. My concern is that for the year, June has the highest recycled water production. And it seems like if we, and I know you guys have talked to our recycled water users and told them, hey, we're blending potable water, and it doesn't look like they've responded to that. So I'm pretty concerned that our total water has gone up in this, where I guess I would have hoped that if we had told them, hey, you know, we now have to blend because the plant's down, they would have decreased their use, where it looks like the exact opposite has happened.
So what I can comment on is how much blending we've done. We were down through the end of June. We were down 14 days in June. We produced 19.7 million gallons of tertiary water in the month, and then we blended with 18 million gallons of potable. So from a production, that's where I can comment, and I'll turn it over to Kelly for conservation.
You know, I don't have an answer why they're not reducing their water use. We do send out messages to all of our recycled water customers, letting them know the situation, and have asked them to cut back. We've also turned on our non-potable groundwater well to try and offset some of that use of potable water. We did, in the supply planning, I've always had some contingency in case something like this happens. So far, as long as we're back online by the end of June, I think we'll stay within that contingency that was allowed, you know, that was planned for this year. But yeah, we didn't get any sort of immediate response, and so maybe we need to look at how we can outreach a little differently next time.
Or currently, because it's not up, right? It's not running.
Not correct.
Right. So
Yeah.
I mean, again, we're kind of getting back to, there was the individual side of the conservation where we saw increases in use over the past couple months. We're seeing that again here in the recycled. So it seems like maybe it's time to hit everybody with some more messaging of like, hey, we're actually not doing as good as we tend to think we are. Because this is pretty alarming to me that they didn't respond with conservation.
Well, and normally when there's recycled water going into the system, which it was for quite a long time, our recycled water customers aren't subject to the same water use restrictions that our potable water customers are. Right. So it's just in these short-term periods where we have blending water that they were asked to conserve, and
they didn't. And they're using, very, very valuable water and they're getting it at a discount as well. They're using potable water at a discounted rate. So I guess that's a concern. And then you mentioned this, and this was kind of my longer term concern, and I had guess I hadn't looked really closely at this planned and actual water production by source. And you've got in the blend water a plan to blend 25 acre feet per month. That's a lot of water. And we have this, beautiful facility, which is not performing as expected, but for the amount of money and energy we've put into this, I would assume that our plan should be zero. And of course, the plan, we're always going to change things, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I would say going forward, I would feel more comfortable if our plan for blending was zero. I don't think we should ever plan to blend. If we did plan to blend, then we should rate that into the rates.
And I will say these projections were developed back in September, October timeframe of 2017. Since that time, our supply strategy that's shown currently, it's been reduced to more to smaller numbers than what's shown here. But
and I'm not expecting you to change this now. I understand this is kind of a backwards-looking document, but I'm just saying, as we're looking at water year 2019. If we're planning to put blended water into the recycled water facility, we should be reflecting that in the rates. And if we're not, then that should be put zero. I mean, I don't think we should, as a policy, I don't think we should plan to blend. I think if there's an emergency, of course, we're required to by the contracts we currently have, which we can, we're looking at different types of contracts going forward. We're required to currently provide them with potable water. But I don't think we should plan to do that on a policy level. I guess that was my kind of longer term comment as we're looking at 19, what we put in that column and the message that sends to people who are using potable water or recycled water.
okay.
Councilmember Snedden?
Thank you. I noticed on the PowerPoint you're already using the One Water logo. I commend you for that. I think that was a great idea to just jump in, start using it, and then maybe it changes over time, maybe not, but it's nice to see that there. I just had two questions. One is there something preventative that could be done for the tertiary issues of these? When you say explosive or violent events, how are we preventing that from happening further?
Councilmember Snedden, the rupture disc should alleviate that violent breaking the pipe failure that we've seen. That's what we're anticipating. It's once the system gets up to a certain pressure, it's like the sacrificial official break, and it will, instead of breaking the pipe, it should rupture that disc.
Is that disc just being put in the ones that have already ruptured, or is it being replaced in other pipes? Maybe I don't understand that quite.
I wish I had a better shot. We're planning on putting in two different spots between the strainers and the feed pumps. And let me pull up.
So that will prevent it in future occurrences throughout the pipes.
It should.
Okay.
There's your. You'll see your feed pumps are going to be on your left. Let me see if I can actually get a cursor on here. I can't. No. And then your strainers are going to be off on more on your upper right. So we're going to put two of them in that piping scheme to give them places to fail versus failing the pipe, which should make it so it's much safer to operate for people who are in that vicinity. We're going to be putting some protective covering over the pipes, almost like a plastic fencing, so that if something goes wrong, it doesn't send these chunks of pipe flying, which is what we've been seeing. And we're hoping that by doing this, we will be able to get it back into service faster. There are some longer lead time pieces of equipment that we are going to probably purchase, pressure relief valves that will be a little bit easier for us, because when these rupture discs fail, you have to take it down and put a new disc in. So that should alleviate that in the longer short term. Ultimately, we will figure out why we're having these pressure spikes and be able to fix the problem. But we are wanting to get it into service as quickly as possible and maintain safety at the plant.
Thank you. And then just one more question. How do you answer the question? We get this question a lot, like desal's up and running, it's fully operational. Why do we still have to conserve, or why is this still the message? So just in terms of messaging, I think that is something that we need to have maybe a unified answer on, and maybe if you have an answer today, but just something to be thinking about also, and how we can message that back out, because that is a sort of a common misconception that, you know, we keep saying desal's up and running. Why do we have to not water our lawns, for instance?
Right. It's a good question. So the the short answer, I guess, is that we've only built it out to the 3125 acre feet per year first phase of the capacity, which is meeting about 20 or 30% of our current water needs. And I think that was appropriately sized given the circumstances. In order to expand the plant to meet more of our water needs, it's going to cost a lot of money. It's very expensive.
It addresses a shortage, it's not a additional source. It addresses a known shortage in the bar chart that I hate, right? So that's really what it is. Okay. Other questions, comments? Is that apparatus there that you're talking about that's having the problem with the pressure pipes, is that all part of the same project for recycling? That project?
It's all related.
Okay. So it's the gift that gives on giving in this particular case, right?
Yes.
So I guess to Megan's point is that I don't know if that's a backwards looking thing like the capacity issue too, but I agree with her point on those columns. I mean, we should be at a more perfect place, and we should be building into the user end expectations that it's obviously not a system that's working well, and there's going to be ups and downs, and maybe you just lose your water source and you have to go back to your regular water source at regular rates. And so
We'll have to go back, because all of our recycled water customers we have agreements with in order for them to connect, and they had to do a lot of infrastructure improvements on their private property in order to connect, and had a cost. And we're willing to pay those costs with the assumption that this was a drought-proof water supply for them. Certainly there's going to be circumstances where it's down for a short term, you know, on a weekly or monthly basis. But over the long term, it has been meeting all the needs on the system for quite over a year, I believe. We'd have to go back and verify, but I think it's over a year that's been meeting all the demands on the system.
it seems like it's in the news too much. So between that and the turtle area of the land given us back at the back of the property, those are like just two presents that just keep on giving to us. So it's unfortunate. So, all right. If nothing else, we'll adjourn to next month on August 16th at 9 o'clock. Thank you.